First of all, a warm welcome to everyone who's joined us, and a thank you to the speakers for joining this first of a series of ESBA webinars, and obviously this one on cybersecurity and SMEs, specifically assessing threats and building resilience. The webinar is supported by Microsoft, for which we are truly grateful. As you all know, cybercrime can have a devastating impact on SMEs, and with our increasing reliance on digital technologies, particularly in these times of COVID-19 and crisis, their exposure to risk is magnified significantly. So the purpose of today's webinar is to debate and hopefully agree some priority actions that we can all take to raise the awareness of the risk, to help SMEs protect themselves and to minimise the incidence of cybercrime, but also to help them recover from any attack. And we're very lucky to be joined by 5 experts from the SME and cybersecurity ecosystem. They are David Caro, President of ESBA. Do you want to give a little wave, David, so that we can identify you all? And also owner and managing director of Quellplast. We have Miha Abrahamsberg, who's a partner at Crick Axum in Ljubljana, Slovenia. We have Fabienne Zwagemachers, policy advisor at Insurance Europe. We have Gabor Giori, CSS security manager at Microsoft based in Hungary. And we have Jean-François Junger, deputy head of unit from the Public Services, Cybersecurity and Capacity Building at DG Connect at the European Commission. So thank you all very much for coming. First, just a few rules of housekeeping for everybody. We have disabled the chat function, but please do feel free to send written questions via the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, and I will ensure that a maximum of 2 of those questions are asked to each speaker after they have presented. After each speaker has presented, we will have a live Q&A session, and all you need to do is press the little the raise your hand icon at the bottom of your screen, and we will be able to then sort of metaphorically give you the mic, and you'll be able to ask questions. When you do so, please identify yourselves and your organisation, and indicate to whom your question is raised if it's not for the whole panel. For everyone's information, this webinar is being recorded, and we will be using it on social media. Talking of which, the hashtags for today's webinar are hashtag ESBA webinars or hashtag ESBA webinars cybersecurity. So please feel free to tweet and post and promote this, the important things we're about to hear during the course of the session. So with that over, I would now like to introduce David Caro, who as you know, as I said earlier, is president of ESBA, has been since 2012, and an entrepreneur in his own right. David founded his company in 1977, and Quellplast manufactures and supplies flock finishes to the automotive industry. And David has very kindly agreed to introduce this session. Over to you, and thank you, David.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this time in the morning. Welcome to the first in a series of ESBA webinars designed to stimulate debate and action on issues of critical importance to small businesses and entrepreneurs, whether in times of crisis or recovery. A big thank you to Microsoft for sponsoring the event, to the panelists, and to you for joining us. The European Small Business Alliance is a respected, apolitical and influential advocate for European entrepreneurs. We are the campaigning voice for the modern European entrepreneur. ESBA campaigns on behalf of 1 million small businesses throughout Europe, all of whom, whether they are micros, self-employed, traditional family business or high-tech startups, share one very important thing in common: They are all entrepreneurs. In order to improve the lives of all European entrepreneurs, ESBA seeks the views of its membership and uses them to create the ESBA Manifesto for Change. Then we campaign hard to convince government to make these changes. Coming in at number 2 on our manifesto is digital risk. The digital risk is one of the most significant yet underestimated threats facing SMEs in Europe. In the age of big data, online trading, and market digitalization, no business can escape exposure to at least some form of digital risk. Businesses that suffer cybersecurity incidents face severe financial and reputational repercussions. In the case of SMEs, the consequences can be especially severe. Data from the US indicates that 60% of those who suffer a cybersecurity incident are out of business within 6 months. And COVID-19 is increasing our companies' reliance on digital technologies and therefore exposing them to much greater risk. The dramatic rise in teleworking and with it the number of devices and locations and use of unsecured networks is creating huge opportunities for cyber criminals who always look for the weakest link in a network. But many of our members tell us that they and their staff are not fully aware of the risks, who do not have the necessary resources or training to protect themselves against the risk, or the support or help to help them recover after an attack. And bear in mind the huge fines that can be levied for data breaches. Last year, Google were fined 50 million euros, British Airways 200 million euros, and on a much smaller scale, a Swedish school board was fined 20,000 euros. We know that the EU, the tech companies, the digital service providers, and other key stakeholders have made significant efforts to bolster cyber resilience. But the crisis and the recovery process that will follow requires us to work together, to work faster, to do more, not just to protect our small business, but now also the future sustainability of the European economy. We look forward to hearing how our panelists are assessing the current risks and what key actions they believe need to be taken by the businesses themselves, by their supporters, by the tech companies, by our legislators to raise awareness, to protect and to help recover. And what blend of solutions will work best to build resilience, whether it is building SME-friendly cyber frameworks, improving cybersecurity, certification schemes, addressing digital illiteracy. I'm sure our panelists will answer these or attempt to answer these and many other questions around this. So I hope you all enjoy and benefit from the experience our panelists will now impart to you. Thanks very much. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, David. Excuse me. Now, first off is Miha Abrahamsberg. He's a partner at Crick Axum and 3 Sigma insurance brokers in Slovenia, and is responsible for leading and developing IT projects throughout both of the companies. Miha, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Karen. So, hello to everyone. I hope you are all well, all healthy. As you can probably immediately notice, the hair salons in Slovenia are still closed because of the quarantine. Anyway, my name is Miha. I'm a partner in a small group of companies from Ljubljana, Slovenia, and I will talk about the practical implications potential cyber attacks have on everyday business. Like Karen mentioned before, our companies offer services in insurance broking, which is our core business, actuarial services, and also IT development. But we mostly do IT development just for our own companies and for data exchange with our clients. So I consider cybersecurity to be a very important subject, and therefore I'm very happy to be invited by ESBA to share our experience today. As you all already know, practically every business, be it small or large, depends on IT on its day-to-day operations, that is communications. So we have emails, we have smartphones, we have social networks, different area of web applications, Our production processes can be run by computers. We have servers, data on the servers, and so on. So we are very dependent on IT. Connecting to this, a cyber attack on our IT system can have very severe consequences, up to the point when we are, because of the cyber attack, we are unable to continue doing business until our IT system is restored, if, of course, we are able to restore it to the previous point. Since this crisis, the COVID crisis started, I believe, unfortunately, that we are all even more susceptible or exposed to cyber attacks. So why? So wherever possible, since the crisis started, we have people working from home. So either remotely from their home computers or using their company's computers from home and from doing business from their home networks. And as a rule of thumb, we can agree that home networks are less secure than business networks. So having an employee working from home and connecting to your business network remotely, of course, adds some additional exposure, additional risk to your IT system as a whole. In our companies, we are very aware of this fact, and so we only allow remote connections to our IT system via secure virtual private network connections, that's VPN connections. We use Microsoft domains, built-in Microsoft remote desktops into Windows 10, and OpenVPN for virtual private connections. And also all other access to our systems, like to email servers or our web applications, is always encrypted. So we use SSL certificates. I think we all should. All of these things I mentioned, of course, we already used this before or did it this way before the crisis. But maybe because of the crisis, now we keep a closer eye on everything. Of course, when we talk about IT security, there is always some costs. There are some costs related to it, or additional costs, both financial or work-related. And I can say it's my estimate that in the case of our companies, IT security costs us approximately 1% of our total annual revenue. But I think this cost is, by my opinion, it's close to nothing because it helps us to sleep better at night. So it is important to be aware of. We can never be 100% secure. No matter how much money we spend, at some point we have to say enough. We cannot be 100% sure to not have an attack. So it's not just in the IT sector, it's also in other fields like, I don't know, fire exposure and so on. And I think that SMEs or small business are less prone to classical cyber attacks or classical hacking compared to big companies. And that is because normally with small business, we do not have a lot of, let's say, valuable data on our servers. That is especially for personal data or credit card data or something like that. And the risks for hackers or hacking groups to hack our company are not met with potential profits the hackers can gain from selling the data they would have stolen from us. But on the other hand, we have email scams and website scams. So we have to be aware of downloading something infected or opening something infected from our emails. And this can happen to everyone. So it's either a person, a small company, or a big enterprise. So that's why it's extremely important that we try and maintain among our employees a culture of risk awareness when using the internet and email. So maybe to sum it up in one sentence, so never, and really never, open an attachment from strange emails or download and open an attachment from unfamiliar websites. And always, of course, we all have to know that nobody is ever going to just give you 10 million euros by condition that you first give in 10,000 euros. So it is because of this latter that I believe that in terms of cybersecurity, at least for small companies, ourselves and our employees are actually the biggest potential threat, either because of not being careful, being negligent, or because of criminal or willful acts. So all it takes is one brief moment of not being careful or one disgruntled employee, and your work computers or servers, they get encrypted. You can have your all data deleted or data stolen. And when this happens, or if this happens, you have a big problem on your hands, and therefore you should have at least the following and this order in place, these measures, I think. First of all, the most important thing is for me to automate off-site backups of your data. And by off-site, I mean put the server on a different location. And this server should not be in the same domain as your primary system. And to this backup server, add an additional code backup, again, on a different location. And by different location, I'm emphasizing this because of the, also because of the earthquake risk. And the second thing is get a cyber insurance policy, because insurance in case of attacks can cover all of the experts costs you need to have your IT system back and running. And insurance can also cover some of the ransom demands when your data gets encrypted or stolen. So if you are without number one, that is backups, in case of cyber attacks, in the worst case scenario always is your company can go under. So it's a really big threat. Maybe to sum it all up, cyber risk is real. It's important to build a risk-aware culture in your company. Invest in IT security. Keep your operating systems up to date. Plan for contingency, backups. Buy cyber insurance. And in the end, I wish you all to stay cyber healthy and be better than your competition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miha. If I may ask a question from my position as moderator, you talk about building a culture of risk awareness, which clearly is absolutely critical. What's the best way of getting these messages across, particularly now in these exposed times? Who's best placed to do it? Where should we start? Because there's still, it strikes us that there's still a certain level of ignorance about the impact and the threat.
Well, before what we used for this type of building awareness were our internal meetings that we have, I don't know, once a week or once every 2 weeks. And we just try to warn or remind people that they should be careful about the things that I mentioned before. And especially when it comes, fortunately, when it comes to suspicious websites, we all have probably some sort of antivirus software on our computers. And that kind of software, I think it's pretty good in warning us about some suspicious websites. But for the email part, that is really just something that you have to remind your people a lot about. And maybe when you have something new, when you see an email, some new type of scam that you've never seen before, it's maybe good to share it with your employees, of course, without the attachment.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, it's a pleasure to introduce Fabienne Zwagermachers from the who's a policy advisor at Insurance Europe. Insurance Europe is the reinsurance federation with, I believe, over 37 members across Europe. And Fabienne specializes in life and non-life insurance, as well as cyber insurance. Fabienne, obviously you've got a nice big plug for taking out insurance policies to help recover from attack, but also from your perspective, how do you raise awareness? How do you ensure that there is a culture of awareness amongst your members?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm representing Insurance Europe, and before I started, Insurance Europe actually represents, through representing their member associations, many SMEs as well. So that's probably interesting to know. When it comes to awareness raising among our members, well, it's really, well, let me put it differently. There are three ways in which insurers can support efforts to build the resilience of SMEs and to make them aware of the risk. So in the first place, that's raising awareness, that's ensuring business continuity by helping them minimize loss and swiftly recover from cyber attacks, and to advise policymakers. So but before I go into these points, perhaps it's interesting to know that the cyber insurance market is a fairly new market. It's still developing, and given the rapid pace with which digital technologies come to market, it's also a still continuously evolving market. So and at the moment, what you see is that because it's so new, the demand is mostly driven by the larger companies, not so much by the SMEs. There is increasing awareness, and obviously COVID-19 has acted as effectively acted as a stress test in that regard. So when I get to those 3 points, awareness raising, insurance business continuity, and advising policymakers, I would say that in terms of raising awareness, many SMEs are not necessarily aware of the fact that they are exposed, as Miha also explained, and insurers have a key role to play. It could be because cyber is often seen as something very technical, something that's part of the work of an IT expert, when in fact it's quite a relevant issue to be discussed at the board level of SMEs. And even when there is awareness of the fact that there should be protection against cyber risk, it's often not clear to the SME how to go about it. So how to ensure that they are protected. And that's where the prevention is important, and prevention is one of the key ways in which insurers actually offer. It's part of the broad range of solutions offered. So insurers sit down with the SME to test their IT system to ensure that their system is sound, and obviously that depends on the size of the SME, the type of services they provide, the level of digitalization, the country, the local environment in which they operate. So there's no one size fits all, and this prevention is so important because in an ideal world, obviously nobody would need an insurance to get to the insurance stage, and of course if an SME has a full understanding of how they are exposed and where the vulnerabilities are, it's easier for them also to negotiate a good contract. So that brings me to the second point. So after awareness raising and prevention, you have coverage to ensure business continuity that helps to minimize loss and ensure a swift recovery. So Miha already touched upon a few things. There are many ways in which insurers can provide support, from support for accidental damage to damage to software, but also in the wake of an event, IT forensic support, legal support, public affairs support. It's very broad, and again, it depends very much on the specificities of a company, and every solution is tailored to their specific needs, and very much so also to their local context in which they operate. And then the third way in which insurers can support cyber resilience is providing advice to policymakers. So we have developed at Insurance Europe a few policy do's and don'ts. In terms of do's, we would say it's a recommendation to strengthen public-private partnerships on catastrophic risk, to to ensure the availability of cyber incident-related data, for the Commission, for instance, to urge member states to increase their cybersecurity, and promoting awareness raising across the board. In terms of don'ts, we recommend to refrain from introducing mandatory schemes, as they could be counterproductive, given that the market is still very new and the risks are so diverse. And in a similar vein, refrain from introducing premature standardization, as the standardization at this point would be quickly outdated. So to sum it up, there are 3 ways in which insurers can boost the cyber resilience of SMEs: raising awareness and prevention, ensuring business continuity by minimizing loss and providing a swift recovery, and advising policymakers at all levels. That would be my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabienne. One quick question for you. Have you experienced an increase in incidents, or have that been reported from your members? And have you stepped up any work with the policymakers in terms of either coming up with a campaign or develop or putting pressure on or asking for a hastening of work on measures that might support SMEs?
Well, in terms of, we're mapping obviously the situation. In terms of an increase of attacks, no, I think it's important to note that every big crisis, every big event comes together with an increase in cyber related attacks. That's not necessarily new to COVID-19. Obviously, it's a bit too early to assess the increase, the actual impact. And we're working together with members to assess the ways the different markets are hit. Different markets and different companies, like I already mentioned, are affected in many different ways, depending on their specific business models and how they organize themselves. So yeah, it's too early to tell. And we are actively engaged also with the Commission and with our members to make sure we manage and mitigate whatever comes out of this crisis.
Okay, thank you. And if I could just one follow up on that. What will need to happen to, you mentioned it was a young industry in this respect. What would need to happen to insurance for IT adverse events to become standard?
Well, awareness, I think at the board level of SMEs, they take the decisions, and if they are aware of the risks, it's easier to take proactive approach to ensure awareness of the way in which they're vulnerable to cyber-related incidents and of what needs to be done as a second step.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Fabienne. And now I'm very delighted to introduce Gabor from Microsoft. And I'm just, Gabor is EMEA CSS Security Manager at Microsoft, and is based in Budapest in Hungary. And I'm delighted to give you the floor now, Gabor.
Thank you very much. So I will try to share a presentation with you. And as you probably can tell, I am not very familiar with Zoom, but...
No, you're doing very well.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Perfect. So, and yes, so what I will try to talk to is a bit more of the technological aspect of the same subject. So at Microsoft, as you can imagine, we are experiencing a lot of customers who are suffering from cyber attacks. So the team I'm leading, we are active mainly for our enterprise customers, but we are also working with a couple of small and medium enterprises as well. So what I will share is what we are seeing and what some of the market research is showing us. So COVID-19 obviously put us in a very, very unique situation because it was very much unexpected. So what we are seeing is that some companies were more prepared than others, But as you can see from this research from IDG, almost quarter of the businesses had to acquire new security solutions to address that business need that people needed to work from home all of a sudden. So, and it brought up a number of issues that needed to be addressed. So Miha already mentioned VPN as something that is absolutely needed in those times. But then again, even for companies who did have a VPN already, what we have seen in many cases that although the VPN was there, but the capacity was not sufficient to support all of the employees, or at least a large percent of the employees, all of a sudden working from home. So one tiny technology that does help is, for example, if you have configured your VPN as a split tunnel, but what that means is that only traffic that needs to go through your company's infrastructure is driven there. Everything else is still going directly to the internet, meaning that you are getting a bit of relief from the capacity surge. Again, what we have seen is that not every company was ready and able to provide hardware for their employees. So all of a sudden, the bring your own device management is something that was a major point that they needed to address. And also not just how they integrate those devices, but also how they are managing those devices. Which is related to the next one, which is hardware and software standard. So if this is something that was not enforced so far, then this was something that was immediately top of everybody's mind. The next one is also great. Now you have your VPN, now you have your devices on the VPN. Now the question is, what happens if your users need help remotely? Because so far, especially for small companies, it was very easy to walk up to someone who was able to help you. Now, how can you provide that support remotely? And there are some very interesting topics like password reset, meaning how do you make sure that the person calling you are in a position to verify their identity and issue them a new password? Because obviously, if you provide the password to the malicious actor, then you handed over the keys to the kingdom. All of a sudden, a number of tools have emerged, Zoom being a prime example, that is helping to address the newly found business issues. So as a result, many mainly small and medium companies realized that the cloud that so far was seen as something to be aware of and not necessarily embraced immediately is actually very, very ideally suited to address their business needs. There was no need to invest in server infrastructure. This is something that scales very well. By the way, kudos to all companies who are providing cloud services out there. Because, so at least what we have seen at Microsoft is that the usage of our cloud services jumped from 1 month, I mean, in less than 1 month, to 100 times the previous usage. And this is, I'm sure this is the same that every other cloud provider is experiencing. But as far as I'm aware, so far, there are no breakdowns in that infrastructure, which is, again, great news for the users. And which is a very sad thing is that as the criminals are unfortunately operating as a business, they know exactly how valuable some of the critical infrastructure is right now. And one of them is being healthcare. So they started to run campaigns specifically focused on those industries. And sadly, it is a very tough decision when you need to decide whether you need to pay the ransom or let people die. So I believe this is very, very, so even difficult to address them, but yeah, so this is something that is a very large ethical and financial dilemma as well. So to underpin what I say with some facts is that so the landscape has not really changed from the perspective of what are the tools that the malicious actors are using. So they are very, very much relying on phishing as so far. Phishing has been for many years the largest contributor of how a successful attack is starting. And then they continue with ransomware. The only new thing, which is something we have not seen, is that ransomware used to be very automated. Now ransomware is a way to check if a corporate network is vulnerable, and if this is, then it is turning into a human-operated ransomware campaign. So basically, they are adding more intelligence to focus on the specific targets they are after. So what you see on the screen is how many COVID or coronavirus-related domains are being registered. And you see that for the red line, that was considered high risk, meaning potentially malicious. And the blue line, which is something that is, well, at least the providers of this analysis believe that they are legit. So this is very, very clearly showing us that COVID is a new theme that is being used, but the tools itself have not been changed a lot. So also in a survey that was run around the chief security officers for large and medium and small enterprises as well, it appears that for small and medium businesses, they seem to be overly confident compared to the realities. So I would caution this audience, and I also would like to encourage you to make sure that you have a realistic assessment of the risk you are facing. And because although you might not hold millions of credit cards, but I am positive that the business you are running is successful because you are dealing with something valuable. That valuable might be intellectual property. That valuable thing might be something that is very, very specific to your business, but also be careful when you say you're not really affected as much as larger enterprises, because you might be connected, you might be a supplier to others. So you are, in that case, also a very, very valuable target, because bad actors know that small and medium businesses usually don't spend as much amount on security than the large enterprises. So small and medium businesses are seen as an entry point for those enterprises as well. So this is about SMEs specifically, and now I will talk about, okay, so what can we do? What are the best practices we are seeing? So Mihai already mentioned backup. I would add to that. So I encourage to have an offline backup. Offline meaning not connected to any network. So which is a bit of a manual work, but regardless where your backup is, if this is online, this is still something that is a target for a ransomware, and ransomware will spread on your network regardless of geographies, regardless of domains. So this is one of the other one best practice. The other thing that again, if you're backing up your data into the cloud, This is giving you an ability to have different versions of the same backup. So if you don't have the infrastructure to build other sites, or if you don't have the infrastructure to do offline backups, which is still the best practice I would recommend, make sure that you are backing up your data to the cloud and have versioning enabled. Because in the worst case scenario, if the last version is overwritten by the ransomware, you still have a chance to use the previous versions that you had. So change management, as it's, I mean, nothing on this slide is really new and specific to COVID. It's just a collection of best practices. So change management, if you remember the 22% of new security solutions that are being implemented right now or were implemented in the last month or so, we still have to make sure that we are using our operational rigor of evaluating and testing the new solutions. So email scam. Again, I agree, user education is very, very important, but luckily most companies have already built-in intelligence into their email systems, which is helping you to automatically filter out most of the malicious content. Again, this is not something that is 100% and never will be, because the attackers are also investing a very serious amount in their techniques. But this is helping you to mitigate most of the common phishing attempts. Multi-factor authentication. So based on a research, well, it's not research, it's based on data that Microsoft has on number of successful compromises against our customers, a very high percentage, I'm talking 95+% of those could have been avoided by simply switching on multi-factor authentication. So when you are using an app, or you're receiving a text message, or some other methods to make sure that you are the one who you actually claim you are. So a bit around the investigations. So if you are hit by compromise and the attackers are successful, then often you are required to do an investigation, both from your business perspective, but also sometimes legally. Any company who is helping you doing that can only look at data that is there. So again, bearing in mind, ransomware is something that is encrypting your data, and sometimes it's not accessible. How do you make sure that you have data that can be investigated by a company who you are trusting with that? So you need to make sure that you have logs and audits that help the investigation. Disable legacy protocols. I believe most of you are familiar with WannaCry and NotPetya. Those are still, although not in very large numbers, but those are still spreading on networks where we have SMB version 1, which is something that is outdated for a very, very long time. Configuration management. Again, if you don't know what you specifically have, you will not be in a position to manage that infrastructure. So make sure you know what you have, you are actively managing them, and please, please, please install the patches as soon as possible. And by as soon as possible, I mean run it through your change management process, but luckily, most companies are really, really predictable when they are releasing those patches. So you will know when this is happening. And I hope this is something that goes without saying, but your anti-malware definition has to be up to date at all times on all of your important assets. And the last one is, it's called the tier administrative model, but it basically is telling you, make sure you are protecting your most valuable assets with the most investment. So in other words, and this is a common analogy that you have heard of probably is that if I am using the same tools to protect my diamonds and paper clips, then in a short amount of time, I will have very few diamonds and a lot of paper clips. So please differentiate what is more valuable for you. And yeah, so the presentation will be shared with you. So you will have a chance to look at a number of Microsoft specific products, articles that help you to do exactly what I described. So this is helping you how to do it. But in short, please take care of yourselves. Please take care of your company's assets, and yeah, stay safe, both physically and virtually. Karen, you're on mute if you want to.
So I am. Thank you very much, Gabor. I have a question from Oksana Paliducic. Good morning. Thank you very much for the useful event. What should SMEs do to avoid exposure and keep visibility of company and products? Bearing in mind that they are using social media at a high level. I think you've answered some of those issues, but generally, how do we get those best practices out to as many, to as far out in the community as we can? And what role do tech companies, for example, or digital service providers have in helping with that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I believe this is something that partially Fabienne was already talking to before. It is key to have the the collaboration between public and private companies. So private companies have a lot of experience in how we are dealing with those issues, and if this is something that can be made available to large communities like the one today, or even larger communities, and I believe this is something that is very helpful. So I know at least Microsoft is very actively working with the policymakers in EU and also across the globe to share those best practices.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabor.
Aaron, can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
From a small business perspective, it's always fascinated me when you hear reports of data breaches, how they know that data has been stolen from a business, or how the business knows. Obviously with ransomware, you know when you get a demand for the ransom, but when data is stolen and then sold on the black internet or the black web, how do you know when that data has been stolen?
So it's a very valid question, David. Unfortunately, the answer is that sometimes we don't. So sometimes what we are also seeing is that when we are investigating a security incident, then in some cases we realize that the attackers have been active in that environment for, on an industry average, seven months. But sometimes, as I also shared in the presentation, we run out of data that we are relying on. So sometimes what we see is that as far as data goes back, they have been compromised. So there is no bulletproof way to do that, unfortunately. There are, again, some technological mitigations like data leakage prevention and so on that are available from a number of vendors that does help with that. So if your data is classified, if your data is encrypted, if your data is stored securely and is encrypted end-to-end, this does help. But clearly, if the users are not following the best practices, then this is something that still can get out, unfortunately.
Thank you, Gabor. Now I'd like to turn to Jean-François Junger, who's Deputy Head of the unit in charge of strengthening Europe's cybersecurity capacity at DG Connect. Originally, I think after an early career as a robotic engineer, Jean-François joined the Commission and has had a rich and varied career in research and Connect, working on the Connecting Europe facility. And now over to you, Jean-François. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's always peculiar to organize webinars and to participate in webinars. As it has been said by nearly everybody before, I think the crisis today demonstrates how dependent we are on digital, but at the same time how useful digital is to our society. So to get the digital to work, we cannot disconnect it from its own security. And as our president said, it's digital and security are the two sides of the same coin. One goes without, cannot go without the other one. So the union has been quite active in the cybersecurity field, politically, but also industrially. And I will try to explain a little bit what we have today in terms of regulation that will help SMEs, that can have an impact for the SMEs, but also what are the priorities in terms of investment and where we should, let's say, push for a strong European cybersecurity industry, but at the same time to make sure that all SMEs and all companies are properly protected, because we cannot afford to have companies too fragile. So in terms of policy, so the Commission published in 2013 its own strategy for cybersecurity, where it was recognized that cybersecurity, first of all, it's a prerogative of the member states. So at the union level, in principle, we have no rights to discuss cybersecurity. At the same time, we recognize, and member states recognize, that we cannot protect one without protecting everybody. If we want a stronger European Union, we must make sure that all the member states have a proper cybersecurity policy in place, so that the weakest link is at the highest level. So because the weakest link defines the level of security you have in a chain. So following that, in 2016, the NIS directive was implemented. The NIS directive aimed at, first of all, the creation within the member states of a policy, in cybersecurity policy, with, for instance, the creation of the certs and the national certs. But it also aims at protecting the critical infrastructure, because critical infrastructure are completely interconnected in Europe. So we cannot make, again, as I said earlier, have those critical infrastructure weak somewhere that might disrupt the entire network of those critical infrastructure throughout the European Union. Importantly for the SMEs in particular, and for the industry in general, is the Cyber Act that was adopted 2 years ago. Last year. The Cyber Act clearly defined, first of all, the role for ENISA, but that's, I would say, it's an administrative issue, but clearly defined a mechanism to have a certification. And the certification is useful for two respects. It is useful for the producer of ICT component, because then they will be in a position to say that their equipment corresponds to the level X of security. But it's also useful for the SMEs buying equipment. They will have a mechanism to understand the level of security they can expect from the component or the service they're buying. So the mechanism of cybersecurity, the certification defined in the regulation, say that ENISA need to produce recommendation, and the Commission with the member states will adopt those recommendations for the certification scheme. And we are now in the process of starting. So there are no certification scheme yet on the table, but we're creating the very first one this year for the 5G. Probably there will be also a certification scheme for the cloud. And then we will continue to evolve and define new certification schemes for the different domain of the ICT world. The regulation does not make the certification scheme compulsory. It was a big debate between the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission. But at the end, it was decided not to make it compulsory, so to leave it to each sector and to each policy to decide if they want to use a certain certification level of equipment when acquired. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean that it should not be used and should not be promoted, and it's what we intend to do. But I would say also actors like insurance can use this certification scheme in order to promote and push buyers of ICT equipment to buy a certain level of security equipment to reduce their cost of the insurance. That's something we have been discussing. That's a possibility. Of course, we're not making it compulsory. It's up to the market to decide how to do it. Now, what we are going to do beyond those legislation, we're also going to work and let's say finance some activities, in particular under the Horizon program, the research program, and also the Digital Europe program. In Horizon, we will do cybersecurity research in general, but we will also do some research in the certification field, because one of the big criticisms of the certification is that the certification in an extremely dynamic world of the ICT might prevent innovation, might slow down innovation, might slow down deployment of solutions, because they would have to go through a certification scheme that will be valid for a certain version of the software might be updated, certification might disappear. So we are going to see and to develop some dynamic mechanism to make sure that we do not hamper innovation and do not hamper the fast deployment of a system. But the Digital Europe program, which is a new program that the Commission has proposed, can, let's say, potentially be very useful, in particular for the SMEs. Let me explain a bit to what the Digital Europe program is. The Digital Europe program aims at creating a strong European industry in three, let's say, critical domains: high performance computing, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. Why do we want to push that? It's because we want to make sure that in particular in the cybersecurity area, that Europe develop a very strong industry to guarantee our sovereignty. So it doesn't mean not to rely on solution provided from outside the European Union, but still it means that the European Union, if needed, can have the knowledge, can have the industry to protect itself alone if needed by circumstances. So what will be financed under the debt today is not totally defined. There was an orientation paper presented end of last year where several elements were explained, one of which is to deploy some infrastructure to provide cybersecurity. We're talking about the cyber shield in order to make sure that we protect, let's say, the European Union as a whole and create an infrastructure for all the actors. But we also talk about the certification mechanism, because we see the certification mechanism as a very powerful means to push SMEs, whether they are provider of ICT solution or buyers of ICT solution, to protect themselves and to protect and to create some kind of a market advantage for the seller, because they would say it has been certified to level X. And with the debt, we could support, it's not defined and finalized yet, but we could support SMEs to bring their solution to a certain certification level, or we could support certification authority to get the capacity to certify things. So all this is on the table, it's being discussed, but it will be a mechanism that would enable us to push the level of security in the member states and in the industry. The last thing I wanted to talk about, where I think, and some of you, the previous speakers, have given a hint of it, one of the things that we need to also dramatically invest is in the skills. In the skills, again, of the producer of equipment, to make sure that they are aware that cybersecurity is a key element that needs to be taken on board from the day one. If you're thinking of developing a system that will be connected to the network, security must be the prime, beyond the functionality of this, whatever you want to produce, its own security, it's critical. We've seen too many IoT is being deployed very quickly, like webcams that have no security, that were immediately abused by hackers and by fraudulent people. But we also want, with a skill, it's to make sure that the buyers and the users of ICT knows the practical step they need to do to protect themselves, what kind of best practice they should follow. Gabo, for instance, presents indeed a series of things that are useful, and I think there we need to spread this information to make sure. And with the member states, we are thinking to see how to create some kind of a network of cyber rangers throughout the European Union, in order to make sure that we have the knowledge shared between all the places in Europe, but also to be able locally to train the SMEs, train whoever needs to be trained, to make sure that they have the minimum skills needed to do their business and to protect themselves. So this is a bit what I wanted to present, what I wanted to explain, what we're doing today at the European level. A lot, of course, depends on the MFF, on what will happen with the new financial frameworks of the European Union. A lot will depend on the discussion that are taking place just now regarding the recovery of the crisis. But our president has reiterated that her two priorities remains the Green Deal and the digital. So we have some good hopes that we will be able to continue and even to strengthen our activity, because we really strongly believe that digital transformation of the Union, it's key, but this cannot be achieved without security and without proper security, meaning without sufficient trust by the consumers, by the industry on the digital transformation benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-François. That was very enlightening in terms of what the focus of your work is, and specifically regarding skills and certification. I know that there's huge benefits there to be had for SMEs. I have one very specific question before we open up the discussion for you, from Oksana. I apologize, Oksana, I can't pronounce your surname. Paladicuc. Is there any official list of secure tools issued by the EU institutions or other institutional organization?
I'm not aware of. I don't think the Commission has produced any kinds of list of tools, and I'm not aware that ENISA would have produced any kinds of tools, or a list of tools. Okay,
thank you very much. Right, well now I'd like to move to a live question and answer session. We've heard a lot of really important stuff about some sobering facts as well, about the level of the threat, more worrying, the level of awareness. I know that David will address this later, but ESBA certainly stands ready to work with all private sector and public sector organisations to help get out those best practices, for which thank you very much. And also we know a little bit more about what the protection is, what the institutions are working on in terms of protecting the SMEs, and also what can be done to recover. But now I'm going to open it up to everybody else, and I see that we have hands raised from Peter Basil. Please, if you could identify your organisation and the question to whom you'd like the panelists to whom you'd like to ask a question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody. That was very insightful. So my name is Pete Basil. I'm a security researcher over at Hedgehog, based in Spain and Gibraltar. So my question really is a little for everybody. Over the past 6 weeks, I've seen a 422% increase in breaches, and so far throughout our client base, we're seeing a 4.2 million euro loss. The two big correlations that I've seen with all of these clients is that 80% of them have no dedicated IT person, no technical capabilities within their business. And they're falling for some of the simplest malicious websites going. So the question really is, what security standards / guidelines would you recommend to small business owners that is written in a way in which they can understand it without having immense technical understanding and capabilities?
Who would like to take that? Perhaps Gabor and Jean-Francois, in terms of reaching out to the community.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So obviously, thank you, Peter. This is very much in line with what we are seeing, is that the lack of dedicated IT personnel is definitely an issue. And I believe what we can add from a technology perspective is to create software that is secure by default. And if the user does nothing else than just clicks through the installation process, then they will have a somewhat secure infrastructure. The reason I say somewhat, and I know even Microsoft products are not there yet, but the reason I say somewhat, because security and usability are always conflicting priorities. So our goal is to create software that is usable yet secure. So that's why I recommended switching on MFA and other things that are very, very effective. But in our experience, we are not in a position to create something that is safe and usable at the same time out of the box. So there has to be a balance. And even when small companies don't have dedicated IT staff, then we need to rely on partners who are specialists in those areas and who can help those customers to get to a secure state.
Okay, thank you, Gabor. Jean-Francois?
Yeah, you also wanted me to answer. So as I said, I think the skill is a key element. And indeed, I think companies, the one-man companies, can be dramatically at threat because they're thinking of their business and not necessarily of the security, because they're thinking of the functionality, what they want to sell, what they want to produce. And security will be something that they will probably all the time be thinking, yes, I should consider, yes, I should, but they have too many other things to do. So we have, I would say, to work with the industry to see how we can improve this, how we can facilitate. Certification mechanism, as I say, can be, but I will stress at the same time, it's not the panacea. I would say the same way you cannot make an OS 100% secure, certification will not provide 100% security. It's just a multiplication of small mechanisms that will improve the overall security, reduce the number of doors through which hackers can enter. But I would say one that the phishing issue, for instance, it is something so well known, I would say, by the people in the ICT world. We need to make sure that everybody realizes that when you get an email that comes from just anywhere else that they're not familiar with, they need basically to be suspicious. And then only to start to see how they should get in. And some companies are doing internally some tests to see if people inside the company are well aware of the issue of the phishing. So the IT department will send fake phishing emails just to see if the staff will realize it's a phishing email or not. Maybe it's some kind of mechanism that it should be developed, I don't know. It's all kind of ideas we should develop and think with the different actors, with the association, industrial association, how can we make sure that this bare minimum is reached by everybody? And then we can continue to work towards a more sophisticated mechanism. But I think still today, there is a lot that needs to be done at the very basic issue, on the very, very basic issues.
Thank you. And David, for organisations like ESBA, there's an important role here as well. Do you agree?
Sorry, I'm forgetting to unmute. Absolutely. I think As Jean-Francois touched on, it's very difficult for small businesses, and particularly one-man businesses, when they have so much to do about running their business, maintaining their customer base, to concentrate on all the other efforts. You're doing your accounting, you're doing your bookkeeping. As we always say, you're a jack of all trades. And to cover your cybersecurity, which might, if you're not involved in IT in your business, can be a great burden on the business. I think it's so important that the support is there to help these people to understand, small businesses to understand the criticality of cybersecurity. And I think that's becoming all the more aware if you're in a supply chain and you could be the weakest link through which hackers will go to gain access to your major supplier or customer. And I think that the time is coming when customers and suppliers will demand a certain level of security within SMEs to protect their own networks. And I think this is a way that will come sooner rather than later. And the more awareness, the more IT skills training that we can get into small businesses, the more important that is.
And an important public sector, private sector engagement and potentially joint campaign.
Absolutely. I think it's about working together with every aspect. That's the public, private sector, whether it be the Commission, whether it be people like Microsoft or the insurance industries, all working together. It's in everybody's interests to get the best solutions we possibly can. I say solution because in the IT world, there is never going to be, as has been said, 100% solution. It's making yourself as secure as possible with the help of everybody.
Miha, did you?
Yes, I wanted to add something to the question. I think, was it Peter? Well, I think it's, if you're a small business owner or a really, really small company, just find another small company that deals with IT security in your country, because if you're a small company, it will be easier for you to work with another small company, check their reputation, and then the IT part, the cost should not be that great so that you cannot afford it. Even if you can afford your own dedicated IT guy, it's still a good practice to have an outside consultant on the IT security, because if you have somebody dedicated just for your company who works there, he's not that familiar with what is actually happening on the whole market of the whole country, and what other companies, what threats they are facing, and what threats were realized. So my suggestion would be find a suitable partner that you can trust, and that the cost is not too high so that you can afford it. Thank you.
Thanks, Miha. Fabienne, did you want to add anything to that?
I think actually the main points have been made. I would underscore the importance of public-private partnerships as well.
Fantastic. Right, then I'd like to move to John Walker.
Thank you. I was wondering if Commission official Mr. Younger could comment on a follow-up to what David Carroll was talking about, with the impact costs on SMEs for this new certification. Has a regulatory impact assessment been done on that? And if so, how can it be obtained? Thank you.
Jean-Francois?
Yeah, so the impact assessment has been done, like for any regulation. And if I remember well, it was in 2017 when the cybersecurity package was presented. And you should find it on the internet along the line of the Commission proposal for the Cybersecurity Act. I would say the best, if you cannot find it, send me an email and I will see to send you the link, the direct link. Like this, I cannot show where it is, but it is on the internet.
Thank you very much, Jean-Francois. Well, I do have a question for Fabienne, if I may. Could the basic standards that Jean-Francois is referring to be incorporated into standard insurance?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I think though that standard insurance doesn't quite exist. As I explained, it depends really on the needs of the specific SMEs on specific markets. So it would really depend on whether or not those tools are at that time a good solution for a specific SME. If that makes sense.
Thank you. Jean-François, do you have a view on that?
My view is more different. Let's say we need to continue to work and to discuss with the different actors. I think with the insurance, with the association and the ICT, the different association, whether of user or buyers of equipment, or seller of equipment. But I think that a strong incentive needs to be there, because we see how much it costs to the society. And we need to see how we can get this awareness raised dramatically and slowly get the mentality to evolve. So if we go to the NIS directive, and the NIS directive, for instance, will be revised, the NIS directive revision might require that the critical infrastructure providers acquire equipment that have been certified. So even though certification is not compulsory, but for that domain, certification would become compulsory. And that's the kind of thinking that they are slowly coming up. As it was mentioned earlier, this crisis has shown that indeed health sector has been a target of hackers, and yet it's critical. So we have to see how we can slowly improve. But as I say, I'm insisting a lot on certification because it is a prime instrument that will be there. At the same time, we are totally aware it is not the silver arrow that will solve everything. Just a small step that will also push in the minds of businessmen, of users of ICT, that security is something we have to take into consideration from the moment we buy something. And not after an attack where we suddenly think, oh, I should have done something about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to go to Stavros Melides, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for this excellent webinar. Is it my understanding correct from this webinar that we as small business will need to have a service provider who would actually look after us, our cybersecurity? It doesn't matter how small we are, whether we are one-man business or we've got several employees, and we need to review our cybersecurity policy. So is that a message I'm receiving from you? Thank you.
Like to take that first. Jean-François?
I think all SMEs should, in a way, take it into consideration. If you have already a policy, then maybe you don't need to change anything. If you don't, then you really need to see what is the best practice for you in order to protect your asset, your infrastructure, and your capacity to operate. And based on your assessment, then you decide if you use a third party to help you, if you acquire maybe someone who will be an IT expert, who will be internally working and so on. That's really a business decision you have to take.
Okay. Yeah. Gabor, you raised your hand. Sorry.
Yeah, but actually, most of what I wanted to say was already said by Jean-François. So I agree. So look at it as any other risk to your business. So I am sure that when you're planning your business, you are making sure that you have a contingency plan. If this is against a situation like COVID, if this is a situation against like an earthquake, cybersecurity is just another aspect of that. And there are ways to protect yourself that are related to technology, that are hiring the right expert to set up your IT infrastructure. But also, as you heard today, insurance is an option as well. So whatever is the option best suited for your business needs is your decision. But yes, do address the risk.
Miha, would you have anything to add to that?
Well, I agree with both Gabor and Jean-François, so I don't think I can add anything else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe just don't rely on your insurance policy too much. Maybe as an example, all of us have a life insurance policy, but none of us wants to use it. So try and prevent that, the risk from happening. Thank you.
Thanks, Miha. And now I have a question from Anthea McIntyre.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Well, good morning. It's very nice to be able to join you this morning. My name's Anthea McIntyre. Until the end of January, I was a member of the European Parliament and very much someone that wanted to champion SMEs. And sitting here listening today, I started thinking about, isn't there a greater role for the European Parliament and indeed the EU, who've always had a very good record for protecting consumers and demanding a better deal for consumers? We've had the Small Business Act, which was all about helping and protecting small businesses. And we had regulations introduced to protect mobile phone users so they can't be ripped off with high charges for traveling around Europe. And I wonder if there is more required to demand better protection from those who supply the internet and internet tools. So I might be asking Gabor whether he thinks that companies like Microsoft should have a requirement placed on them to provide better security for small businesses that buy their products. But it also would be nice to hear from the DG, from Jean-François, to see if he can see something more that the EU can do.
I'll talk to the technology, or well, actually the business aspect of your question. I'm afraid I am not in a position to talk to the policies. I'm sure Jean-François will do that. So we are running a company, and this is as it's coming not a surprise to you that we are profit oriented. So it is in our best interest to provide any of the user segments with tools that they will want to use, because this is how we will be profitable long term. So this is something that is very much already in our business model. So without going into very deep technical details, Microsoft is investing at least $1 billion each year into security. And this is something that is available in most of our products. So if you think of Windows Defender, this is a very effective anti-malware solution available as part of the operating system. Of course, we have to be careful not to be over the fence when some regulators see it as, oh, we are abusing our power to push one solution. But I am sure any other company that you are dealing with is using the same logic. So the more we can provide to our customers and giving them as much security as possible, the more successful we are from a business perspective.
I was expecting you would also ask me to intervene. From a legislative point of view, I'm not aware of anything happening at the moment specifically on the question. At the moment, we are focusing our efforts into the implementation of the Cyber Act, which includes the certification mechanism. And then we're also going to revise now the NIST directive for the critical infrastructure protection. I would say today's crisis demonstrates how critical it is to make sure that the health service, but also the electricity, water supply, and so on, and financial system works effectively, whatever happens. In terms of protection of companies, for the rest, we will see how we can, in particular with the financial means or regulation we have proposed, how we can effectively do that. One regulation, and I haven't mentioned it because it's a bit technical, we have at the moment on the table, is the creation of a competence center and a network for cybersecurity. The purpose of that will be to coordinate far better all the different financial instruments that exist around cybersecurity, and to create a network throughout the European Union to make sure that they are known and used by everybody, whether you live close to Brussels or whether you live at the other end of the Union, to make sure that all industry are aware and can benefit from it and can from it protect themselves. This is still under negotiation. The current crisis is delaying the negotiation. The Parliament has been ready since last year. The Council is getting ready now, but we have issues to go to the first trilogue. So hopefully we can get it still under the Croatian presidency, but we're not sure at the moment.
Thank you very much. I have just one last question before we move to David to wrap up, as we're running out of time. Oliver Lehmeyer, CEO Cyber Risk Agency. As DSGVO defined, companies need risk adequate protection. Security standards as a one-size-fits-all approach will not meet this requirement. Don't you think that the consequent implementation of DSGVO is GDPR? Is there anyone who wishes to talk to that? Otherwise, we can respond offline. Right, Oliver, we'll make sure that you get a written answer to that. Okay, so thank you all so much. Thank you for your pertinent questions. And I would now like to hand over to David Caro to briefly close the session. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Karen. First of all, I'd like to thank all the speakers as well. I think we've had a good variation from the small business aspect that Miha has given us, particularly his comments on the protection that we need to put in place is not necessarily cheap, but the consequences of not putting that in place are far more expensive. The insurance aspect, of course, making sure that we have protection in place in case the worst happens. And like again, Miha said, we really don't want that to happen, but at least it's a good backup should a problem arise. The hardware and software implications from Microsoft, I think, were an excellent input, and particularly, as I mentioned earlier, the risk of the small business being a gateway into the larger businesses, because the protection that small businesses have sometimes is not up to the standard it should be. And I think that that's an area that we're going to have to look at in the future from a small business perspective. And then the regulation aspect from the Commission is very welcome to hear what's going on. I know it's not an easy subject because you have to try and balance the regulation and the protections you want to bring in against the risks of inhibiting the industry in bringing more conditions and more innovations in place. So I know it's not an easy aspect, and I sympathize with the regulators in what they're trying to do. Nevertheless, we believe that efforts should go one step further, and ESA, in partnership with the European Commission and other relevant stakeholders, should develop a self-assessment online tool in order to enable SMEs to evaluate their needs on digital security and take appropriate action to mitigate the risk. The software should be free for entrepreneurs to download and regularly updated in order to provide a trustworthy evaluation of their ICT systems. And I think that we need to promote something like this, develop something like this and promote it widely. And I think all aspects of industry, Microsoft and the other providers, the insurance industries, the Commission and member states should promote this to their small businesses once something is up and running, and encourage small businesses to improve their ICT skills, and really realize the risks that there are out there if you don't take this action. Once again, thank you to all our speakers, and a very great thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, and I just echo his thanks, and look forward to seeing you all at the next ESBA webinar, but in the meantime, stay safe. Thank you.